Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV UK edition. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Good Morning America recently raved of their book buzz pick we began at the end. The Chris Whitaker's new novel is a heartbreaking, page-turning, swashbuckling thriller that debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. It's already been optioned by Disney for an upcoming series. Readers are describing it as a West Coast where the crawdad sings, while the New York Times found a moving, propulsive story, where the Washington Post celebrated as something new, the protagonist's anguished, gorgeous voice, filled with rage and tenderness, one that Oprah Winfrey's magazine O applauded as ravishing, pulse-racing suspense, and that Newsweek promised you'll be thinking about long after the final page. The Daily Mirror UK crowned it a profound masterpiece, adding that they'd be amazed to read a better novel this year. Winner of the Gold Dagger for Best Crime Novel from the Crime Writers Association UK and Best International Crime Fiction Novel from the Australian Crime Writers Association, The Hollywood Reporter broke the news in the wake of the book's success that Disney's 20th Century had snagged rights to the hotly anticipated novel. The studio won rights to Chris Whitaker's mystery over multiple other outlets. Always entertaining, Reader's Digest declared of his debut, Tall Oaks, that it was perfect for fans of Twin Peaks, Fargo, and the truth about the Harry Kubert affair. Chris Whitaker's stunning debut novel is dark, hilarious, and heartbreaking. And similar rounds of praise have followed for All the Wicked Girls, The Forevers, and his latest, All the Colors of the Dark, and he's here today to talk about it all. Chris, welcome to the show. Now, as we all know, one of the greatest things about books as a kid is that they can be as much for escape as for education. When you were growing up, what kind of role did storytelling play in your life?
For you? I think probably books. I think like my dad was a big reader and took us to the library every weekend and would just kind of leave us there for a couple of hours, me and my older brother. And I'd find because he had a shelf in the house and it had Stephen King books on it, and I wasn't allowed to read them. And straight away that piqued my interest. Like why is there a book that I'm not allowed to read? Like I couldn't comprehend that a book could be frightening or could make you feel so scared. And my dad said, no, it will really scare you. And I thought it's a book. I get scared of films, but I've never read a book that would scare me. And so I started reading it at the library, and I would bury it in like the children's area and then take it back every week because I wasn't allowed to take it home. And that was the first time that I was properly terrified by a book, and I properly felt something in it, and it made me see books in a different way. And after that, I read loads when I was like 10 or 11. I read loads of point horror books, and I loved those. I thought they were really cool, and those are my earliest memories of reading, and just tons of books. Like when my mum was cleaning out her attic years ago. Like there were just stacks of boxes of books that I had when I was a kid, and now my kids read them. So yeah, it's really cool.
That is a full circle moment of sorts. Was the writer you become an ambition you'd already begun aspiring to in your youth?
I didn't. I was not academic at all at school. I didn't do very well at school, and so I felt like that sort of job was the preserve of the like the educated, the people that went to university or went to Oxford and Cambridge, and like we had a couple of author visits at my school, and they were kind of elderly and really well spoken, and it just felt completely out of reach to someone that grew up in London and went to the school that I went to. I didn't know anyone, that had gone on to become a storyteller of any kind, like anyone that did TV or anything like that. It was strange to me. Although Amy Winehouse went to my secondary school very briefly, so that there was some artistic talent there, but it didn't extend really to writing. So no, it wasn't something. It wasn't ever on my radar. I didn't ever consider it. Um, I didn't think I could do it. And I did probably give it some thought, like reading Stephen King and things like that and thinking this would be a really cool job. I can't believe someone gets to tell stories for a living. But as well, when you're a kid, picking up an adult book, they're big, aren't they? There's a lot of pages, a lot of words. And I remember like having to write essays that were 1,000 words or something like that. And it felt like the end of the world, like how am I going to possibly write 1,000 words? So to go from that to writing like my newest book is 135, something like that, like it would just seem like there's a mountain to climb and I'm not equipped to climb it. So definitely not, no.
Instead, you began a journey that could have become a novel or a film, and how wild the ride got at times, and how dangerous it did for you personally, as an important real life incident happened when you were 19 that would subconsciously begin shaping your book writing to come. If you take us back to that life changing experience and how it affected your pre noveling life.
I was mugged when I was a teenager, when I was like 19. So I left school with no qualifications, and I was, a bit kind of adrift. I kind naively thought that something would find me. I thought that I would find my path, and or it would find me, and everything would be okay. But I really didn't want to go to university and messed up my exams, so that kind of put paid to the idea. But I didn't know what I wanted to do anyway. So if I'd gone to university, it would have been just like a lot of my friends went just for the experience, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I was kind of keen to get out and make money, and I just tried loads of different jobs. I worked in like a supermarket, and then I sold electrical cabling, and I did loads of bar work, which I loved, and I kept kind of changing lane. And I remember saying to my dad, "Oh, like maybe I should be a mechanic or something like that. I really like cars." And then so went down that road for a little while of looking into that, and then I was working as an estate agent. Um, in London, in North London, and I was out one morning delivering leaflets through people's doors, and someone asked me to borrow my cell phone, asked if they could borrow my cell phone. And I thought I'm gonna get mugged, but I also thought the guy is not very big, and I'm on my own, and he's on his own, I'm on my own. It's one on one. I'm not going to give him my phone, because when you're 19, you don't realize that you're kind of not indestructible. You just I'd been in loads of fights as a kid. Like I had quite a tough group of friends, and you always had each other's back, and so it wasn't unusual to get into a fight. It wasn't unusual for someone to be mugged. But so I had a fight with this guy, and then he pulled out a kitchen knife, and I distinctly remember thinking he wasn't going to use it, because it's a cell phone. There's just no way. And then I thought he was punching me repeatedly in the side, but he was stabbing me again and again. And I was wearing a white shirt at the time. We both kind of stepped back, and I looked down, and it was just completely red, like covered in blood. And I dropped the phone, and it smashed. And then he picked up the pieces and ran off. And I wasn't, I got back to my car, drove myself to the hospital, had stitches, and I wasn't prepared afterwards mentally for what would come. And I didn't know the term PTSD. I didn't know about depression, anxiety, things like that. I was, yeah, like ill-equipped for it. And as well, having a group of kind of friends, like a group of males together, it's not always the easiest thing to talk about like feelings and say that you're struggling. And so I kept my mouth shut and just got on with it. But I stopped sleeping. I was really bad at sleeping, stopped eating, was drinking, taking drugs, things like that, doing things I shouldn't have. But it's more because I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept playing it over in my head, like what if I'd done X, Y, and Z differently? If I given my phone straight away, if I'd gone down a different road, it wouldn't have happened. And then I found a book in the library. It was a self-help book, and it talked about writing as therapy, and it talked about how you take the traumatic incident and you change the people involved to fictional characters, and you change the location to the last place you were happy, and you change the outcome to whatever you want the outcome to be. It's like kind of reframing what happened in your brain, and so I changed everything. It was the first time I'd written anything since school, and I wrote down what had happened, and it kind of got me through a difficult period in my life. Just writing. I just kept going back to it every night when I couldn't sleep, when everyone went to bed. I would sit down and write a bit more of this fictional account of what had happened, and then I started to build out from it. So to look at the characters and things like that, and without really thinking I'm going to be a writer. I didn't think I'm going to write a book, and and so maybe a year had passed after that, and I got through it, and I thank writing for that. I don't think I would have got through it otherwise. I was really in a really bad way, mental health wise. And then I went to work in the city as a stockbroker, and I worked there for like a year and a couple of years, really enjoyed it, and I wanted to be a trader. And my boss said to me he would give me a chance on the trading desk, but he said if you lose $1 million, No, if you lose $10,000, you stop trading. And so, and on my first day, I lost $2 million. So it was really brutal, and I kept my mouth shut again and didn't tell anyone, and thought I could get myself out of trouble basically, but I couldn't. I lost a bit more, and then eventually came in one morning, and everyone was waiting for me, and like the lawyers, the bosses, and there was just an empty seat at the end of the table, and so I sat down, and like it all came out, and but that I'd started to make money, like a bit of money back, and they offered me the chance to pay it back. They said if you pay back half of it yourself, we won't go to the police. And so I just signed the contract, and I was 24, and in $1 million of debt, and psychologically really tough to deal with again. And I was getting married at the time, and the wedding costs were spiraling because everyone thought I was this really successful trader, like doing really well. So I was just putting everything on my credit card, and I turned back to writing for the first time since I was 19. So like 5 or 6 years later, I picked back up with writing because I thought it's the only constant in my life. It's the only thing that that gets me through, that I turn to when things are going wrong. And so I went back to it, and carried on writing, and eventually, like, it took years to pay the debt back, but I was nearly 30, and I thought I'm gonna quit my city job and write a book, like with no money coming in or anything. It's mad, isn't it?
Now, that's a gamble many authors we've spoken to on the show took when they had a story inside of them they felt they absolutely had to get onto the page. When your version of that moment arrived, how much did you find yourself drawing on your own trauma from the mugging and everything else you'd experienced leading up to that point that you then poured into what Reader's Digest would ultimately congratulate as a stunning debut novel that's dark, hilarious, and heartbreaking? Why did it make sense to set this mystery against the backdrop of America versus Britain, say, in Tall Oaks?
I mentioned before that I first started writing as therapy, and it said to change the location to the last place you were happy. And my parents split up when I was quite small, and I was really close with my dad, and all of a sudden he wasn't around, which was tough. And he took my brother and I on holiday to Disney World in Florida. And so when I looked back when I was 19, and I looked back to the last place I was happy, I just straight away thought of the US, and it kind of became my safe place. So I would sit down, like, because I had all these problems in London, all these terrible things that happened. Some of them were my fault, some of them weren't. Some of them were just chance, and London felt really kind of messy to me, like congested in my brain. And America, like, I could sit down at my desk, close my eyes, travel 4,000 miles mentally to this huge place, where I could kind of be brand new, and be anyone, and I could be a storyteller. I didn't have to be a kind of fuck up that had messed up their life and was using writing as therapy. I could just be a storyteller, and I could set my story somewhere where I didn't have any horrible memories, and where everything felt open, like it felt like this huge, vast place, where I could just there were no constraints on my imagination. Like you said, you didn't do any kind of formal courses or anything like that. I didn't know how to structure a story. I didn't know how to begin. I didn't know how to pace it. I didn't know, how to put in a twist. I just didn't know what I was doing. I just knew what kind of felt right. And there's a character in Tall Oaks called Manny, and he's kind of the star of the show. He's this teenage boy that's having an identity crisis because his dad has walked out, and he kind of reinvents himself as these alpha male characters, and he kind of ridiculously tries to be a gangster, and he's a teenager, and he tries to shake down Pizza Hut in his town. It's all a bit kind of comical, and I started, the first thing I ever wrote was Manny. I wrote some Manny, and I just wrote this scene where he's trying to get a new car because he just passed his driving test, and they're I go to a car dealer's, and it just made me laugh, and I was just sitting there, and then I was living in like this converted warehouse in a town in Hertfordshire, and it was kind of like over loads of different levels. And I remember one night my son had just been born. He was about 2 or 3, something like that, and I was looking at the baby monitor, and he was like 4 floors below me, and I could have sworn I saw something in the corner of his room, and it really looked like the outline of someone sitting there, like in a rocking chair. And I thought, God, there's someone in his room. So I ran downstairs, And it was nothing. He'd left one of his toys, his giant soft toys, stacked in the corner. But it gave me the idea for, what if there was someone in my son's room? What do you do if you see it on the baby monitor? You've got, if you get down there, what would I have done if he was missing? And there was no one there, and it gave me the idea for what I thought would be a crime thriller. But I also had Manny, this character, and I wanted to put the two of them together, but they didn't really feel like they fit. Certainly not in a book I'd read before. But then I started to build out from the actual event itself, from the abduction in Tall Oaks. I started to build out from there, and I started to think, what happens in that period? If you live in a small town and something terrible happens, some terrible crime happens, what happens 3 months down the line when you kind of have to get on with your life, but you're all marred by this terrible thing that's happened. And that's where Tall Oaks kind of picks up the story. And I started to look at everyone in the town, and Manny. So I would go from writing Manny, kind of getting ready for his first prom, to writing Jessica, the boy's mother, the missing child's mother, who is completely falling apart. She's lives at the bottom of a bottle, and she's got all sorts of problems, and they coexist together, but their problems kind of feel like the biggest thing in the world to them. It's all relative, isn't it? We could be living next door to someone that's going through something terrible. We have no idea about it. We could be going through something to them would seem trivial, but we've all got our problems and struggles, and we also all kind of present a face to the world, like, because I've had some really difficult periods in my life, and I'm kind of the master of not letting anyone know. I never asked for help. I never, no one would know that I was struggling. And I took that and kind of poured it into Tall Oaks.
Did you have an idea early on of who done it, so to speak?
I mentioned before that I first started writing as therapy, and it said to change the location to the last place you were happy. And my parents split up when I was quite small, and I was really close with my dad, and all of a sudden he wasn't around, which was tough. And he took my brother and I on holiday to Disney World in Florida. And so when I looked back when I was 19 and I looked back to the last place I was happy, I just straight away thought of the US, and it kind of became my safe place. So I would sit down, like, because I had all these problems in London, all these terrible things that happened. Some of them were my fault, some of them weren't. Some of them were just chance, and London felt really kind of messy to me, like congested in my brain. And America, like, I could sit down at my desk, close my eyes, travel 4,000 miles mentally to this huge place, where I could kind of be brand new, and be anyone, and I could be a storyteller. I didn't have to be a kind of fuck up that had messed up their life and was using writing as therapy. I could just be a storyteller, and I could set my story somewhere where I didn't have any horrible memories, and where everything felt open, like it felt like this huge, vast place, where I could just, there were no constraints on my imagination. Like you said, you didn't do any kind of formal courses or anything like that. I didn't know how to structure a story. I didn't know how to begin. I didn't know how to pace it. I didn't know, how to put in a twist. I just didn't know what I was doing. I just knew what kind of felt right. And there's a character in Tall Oaks called Manny, and he's kind of the star of the show. He's this teenage boy that's having an identity crisis because his dad has walked out, and he kind of reinvents himself as these alpha male characters, and he kind of ridiculously tries to be a gangster, and he's a teenager, and he tries to shake down Pizza Hut in his town. It's all a bit kind of comical, and I started, the first thing I ever wrote was Manny. I wrote some Manny, and I just wrote this scene where he's trying to get a new car because he just passed his driving test, and they're go to a car dealer's, and it just made me laugh, and I was just sitting there, and then I was living in like this converted warehouse in a town in Hertfordshire, and it was kind of like over loads of different levels. And I remember one night my son had just been born. He was about 2 or 3, something like that, and I was looking at the baby monitor, and he was like 4 floors below me, and I could have sworn I saw something in the corner of his room, and it really looked like the outline of someone sitting there, like in a rocking chair. And I thought, God, there's someone in his room. So I ran downstairs, And it was nothing. He'd left one of his toys, his giant soft toys, stacked in the corner. But it gave me the idea for, what if there was someone in my son's room? What do you do if you see it on the baby monitor? You've got, if you get down there, what would I have done if he was missing? And there was no one there, and it gave me the idea for what I thought would be a crime thriller. But I also had Manny, this character, and I wanted to put the two of them together, but they didn't really feel like they fit. Certainly not in a book I'd read before. But then I started to build out from the actual event itself, from the abduction in Tall Oaks. I started to build out from there, and I started to think what happens in that period. If you live in a small town and something terrible happens, some terrible crime happens, what happens 3 months down the line when you kind of have to get on with your life, but you're all marred by this terrible thing that's happened. And that's where Tall Oaks kind of picks up the story. And I started to look at everyone in the town, and Manny. So I would go from writing Manny, kind of getting ready for his first prom, to writing Jessica, the boy's mother, the missing child's mother, who is completely falling apart. She's lives at the bottom of a bottle, and she's got all sorts of problems, and they coexist together, but their problems kind of feel like the biggest thing in the world to them. It's all relative, isn't it? We could be living next door to someone that's going through something terrible. We have no idea about it. We could be going through something to them would seem trivial, but we've all got our problems and struggles, and we also all kind of present a face to the world, like, because I've had some really difficult periods in my life, and I'm kind of the master of not letting anyone know. I never asked for help. I never, no one would know that I was struggling. And I took that and kind of poured it into Tall Oaks.
Once realized, Mail on Sunday would celebrate this as a gripping debut, where the Sun observed that it's rare that a novel can be both brilliantly comic and tragic, and balance the two so effortlessly. And to top it off, you'd take home the CWA John Creasy New Blood Dagger Award. What was the greatest reward for you of seeing the first book's publication, after all the risks you took personally and professionally getting there?
Okay, so my boss was kind of, because they had offered me a promotion. He had called me in to offer me a promotion. It was like really big money, and it was like I was 30 and my life was finally on a track I wanted it to be on. My wife was pregnant at home. She was a student, so had no job, no money coming in, and it felt really reckless. It felt like, and I didn't tell her till I got in. I said, "Oh, surprise! I've quit my job today. I'm going to write a book." And she didn't know I'd ever written anything. So it was like she was very supportive. I think we stayed up all night that night talking about it, and she was really supportive, and she kind of was relieved because I unloaded a lot and told her, I've been really struggling and I've been turning to writing, and I don't think that I can be a stockbroker for the rest of my life. I don't think this is what I want to do. I'm really, like, I just wasn't happy at all. And it's kind of the thing, when you get the thing that you think is going to make you happy and it doesn't, it's a bit frightening. It's a bit like, I've got quite a good job. I drive a nice car, live in a nice place. But why aren't I happy? That this, and I thought that writing might make me happy, and she said go for it, but I didn't really know how to. So we sold everything. We sold up, lowered our outgoings, moved to Spain, because it was cheaper to live out there, and we thought we'll go and live in Spain for a while, and I'll write a book while we're living in Spain. And I did, and I wrote Tall Oaks, and it felt very rough, and it felt like that kind of not polished at all. So we flew back to London, and I sent it out to some agents because I didn't even know you needed an agent. I didn't know how to get a publishing deal. Had I known how hard it is, I probably wouldn't have done it. If I'd known that the stats, like my agent gets hundreds of manuscripts, takes on a couple of people a year, and I pitched it as a YA novel, which it clearly isn't. Like, I just messed up everything you can do. Everything I could mess up, I did. Like, I had nothing to say in my cover letter. You're supposed to pitch yourself. I didn't have any creative writing courses. I just said, I think it was like 2 lines, like, I'm a stockbroker, I've written this book. And I got lots of agent offers, like about 6, I think, straight away. And I went in and met my agent. She was then at WME, and they were one of the only agencies that I'd ever heard of. And I think probably because of the Hollywood connection, I went on their website and they repped like everyone, and it was a big deal. But it was more the connection with my agent, Kath Summerhays, who I'm still with now. She moved from there and went to Curtis Brown, which is where she is at now. But I she really liked Tall Oaks, and she did a bit of work on it and then sent it out, and then I met an editor called Joel Richardson, who's like he was very young at the time, and just starting out, and he really loved Tall Oaks, and he had some ideas for it, and they offered. It was a tiny amount of money, and no, and there's no way I could have given up a job or anything like that. It was like, and I thought, God, this is going to be really tough, and I. I remember getting his edits for the first time, the editorial letter. And I remember thinking, God, why did you buy this book? Clearly, I've written the worst book that anyone's ever written because I'd never been edited before. I didn't know that it's like a kind of like a 10 pages of what you've done wrong. You know, it was like it was a shock, but I'm not precious at all about that. I like the editorial process. I feel like kind of when I'm writing, I feel slightly lost, like I've been dropped down in the middle of a forest and I'm trying to find my way out. And an editor is like backup, like they're there to guide you out, to show you the way, to beat a path out. And I really appreciated that. And I began to love the process of, writing a book and working with someone on it. And especially someone that knows more than I do, about the structure of it. And he told me with Tall Oaks, he said, make sure that every page moves the story forward. And it didn't in the first draft. It just didn't. I just went off on tangents and went off like kind of all over the place. And then it slowly became something that we were happy with. And then it became something that I really loved. And it was strange. The whole process, like looking back at it now, I can't believe I quit my job and did it. And I can't believe it worked out. Seeing the finished, printed, bound book for the first time was like it was surreal. Seeing your name on something, I wasn't prepared for it. I think I really felt that I had achieved something. But on the flip side, what people don't really tell you for the most part is that when you publish a book, nothing really happens. It's not like it doesn't set the world on fire. It just is another book that's on the shelf. And I was I didn't have any idea that we would go on to win a prize or anything like that. But that came quite a long time after publication. And again, that was brilliant. Like it was really good for my ego. And it was like because I went to the CWA ceremony and there were big name Sunday Times and New York Times best-selling authors there, and my book had not sold very well. And I won. And I remember being quite stunned because I didn't write a speech or anything. And I went up and I kind of forgot to thank everyone. And even then after that, it was brilliant because it gave me the confidence to write the next one and make me feel like people kind of believed in it. But again, it didn't really do anything. It didn't start selling loads. It's something really good to have on your CV, and it's wonderful and to be accepted by your peers.
Within writing your next standalone, All the Wicked Girls, what drew you to telling this sort of a special sibling story here?
It's a twin story, and I'm close with my brother. We're not twins, but and this was before I'd written Duchess and Robin, and I like the relationship between siblings. Like there's this. It's like I've got two boys and a daughter who's much younger, but the two boys they fight quite a lot, but they're also they're blood. They'll do anything for each other, and I'm like that with my brother. And I think it's a powerful emotion to hang a story on, and twins are even closer. I grew up with some friends who were twins, and to if what for one of them to go missing, it's like losing a limb for the other one, and so I was really interested in what would happen, especially because they're polar opposites as well, which twins often are. Like that. Summer is this she's kind of the light of the town. Everyone loves her. She's a brilliant student, gifted musician. She helps her parents out all the time, never in trouble. And then Rain is the polar opposite, like she would be the Danny DeVito to Arnold Schwarzenegger in that film. She just she's trouble and troubled, and it's Summer that goes missing, and everyone assumes, if someone's going to get into trouble, it's going to be Rain, and Rain's going to be the one that goes off the rails, and it's Summer, and we learn Summer's story through kind of every two or three chapters. There's a Summer story. Hers is much shorter, and we start to piece together what's happened. And it was a really tough book to write because I knew how it was. how it was going to play out, and I knew it was going to be really difficult. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it was really tough, that book to write. And after that, again, it was reviewed really well, but didn't really sell well. It was the same story with Tall Oaks, and I'd signed a two-book deal for not much money, and then I signed another two-book deal, and with We Begin at the End in mind, and just felt like, if this is how my career is going to be, that's okay. Because I was still working loads and not seeing my kids as much, but writing made me feel better. I didn't struggle as much with those horrible feelings I had after I was stabbed and when I lost the money, a kind of depression that I still live in fear of now. And it just gave me what I needed. And I thought, if this is all it's ever going to be, I mean, I would write for free, and I would write if no one were to ever read a word of it. I would definitely do that because it gives me so much.
People magazine would call Cape Haven, California, the setting for your breakout novel, We Begin at the End, as a pretty town of broken souls. Its chief cop clings to the past as his body fails. A drunk former beauty can barely care for the kid she loves. And her fierce 13-year-old daughter, Duchess, imagines herself an outlaw, willing to do anything to defend her little brother. All set within a cinematic story whose layers the Hollywood Reporter explored, first following the release of convict named Vincent King, who's released from prison 30 years after being convicted of killing a 7-year-old girl, and the connection he has with the victim's 13-year-old niece, Duchess, and the chief of police in this small California town, Vincent's former best friend, whose testimony helped send him to prison. Please introduce viewers who haven't met them yet to the residents at Cape Haven, and talk a bit, if you would, about how you wove together the currents of their individual storylines into the broader body of what the New York Times ultimately called a moving, propulsive story.
I was coming out of contract, and I signed another two-book deal for not a lot of money because Tall Oaks hadn't done that well. And I said to my agent, I said to my editor at the time, I said, I've got this idea for this book. It's something I've been working on. And I kind of gave her a very broad pitch and made it sound a bit like True Grit. And it's this little girl and kind of on a quest for revenge. But when I was writing it, it felt like something bigger. It felt like something bigger than I'd ever done before. I felt like I kind of hit my stride in a way that I hadn't before. And I found a style that suited me. And I found that leading with this kind of these two narratives. So you have Duchess in it, and you have Walk, the policeman, and you get to switch between them, and it really suited my style. And it was always going to be difficult to hang an adult story on the shoulders of a 13-year-old, without kind of falling into making her sound too wise or anything like that. I knew that Duchess was going to have a tough time. I knew that we were going to follow a year in the life of a 13-year-old girl. It was going to be like a really pivotal year in her life. And I knew that I wanted to look at the kind of shadow of past mistakes and things like that, because I felt like I'd made tons of mistakes in my life and they still haunted me. And I wanted to look at this terrible thing that happened. So the book begins 30 years before the main story begins. Like there's an opening kind of prologue, and a child dies, and this child is Duchess's aunt. And then we skip forward and we find out that Duchess's mother dated a boy called Vincent, who was directly responsible for the death of this child. And Duchess was kind of, though she was born a long time after it happened, she was born under this cloud.
Good Morning America would report within the novel's release that everyone was falling in love with Duchess Ray Radley. The unforgettable Stetson-wearing, self-described outlaw whose wit and passion are just as sharp as her mouth. Duchess is more than an entertaining protagonist, catapulting this book into the literary stratosphere. Before the book's commercial success, she was simply a character on the page. Written in solitude during a time of immense struggle, as a way for author Chris Whitaker to make sense of his own personal tragedies. And if you've read the book, it'll come as no surprise to you that the sheer existence of Duchess once saved Chris's life. Please elaborate, if you would, on what you exorcised personally from your past through this character's creation and journey on the page that you ultimately found healing.
So interestingly, when I went just after I was stabbed and I had to do the writing exercise when I was 19, I changed myself to the fictional character of Duchess when I was 19. And that I'd been writing bits and pieces of her story since I was a teenager. So when I lost all the money in the stock market, I went back to Duchess's story and wrote a bit more. And I wrote about this girl that was struggling way more than I was. She had a really difficult time if I was feeling down, she was like her mother was a depressive. If I was feeling angry, Duchess was burning with rage, and I projected a lot into this character. But again, I didn't, it felt, it's funny because it's about a 13-year-old girl in the US, but it felt too personal to go back and write it again. Her mother's a depressive, drinks too much, has taken drugs, really struggles to be a mother and a role model. And it's a difficult thing for Duchess. And then from there, I wanted to give her someone, someone that she looks after, and it's her younger brother, Robin. So I did a lot of research into children that are forced to grow up too quickly. I had quite a crappy childhood myself, and had a really difficult time when I was around that age, like 10 years old. And so I wrote Duchess with Robin, her younger brother, and she's forced to be a carer. She's forced to grow up before she should, and she has this kind of responsibility on her shoulders that she shouldn't have. And her mother is friends with grew up with a guy named Walk, who is the chief of police in this town that doesn't really have any crime. And Walk is kind of her true north. She resists him because she doesn't like an authoritative figure, but she also knows that he's a good man. And so she's got these people around her, but no one that she can truly rely on. And she wants it to be a mother, but it isn't her mother, because her mother can barely look after herself. And then the story just kind of evolved from there. And I remember writing it over years.
To give fans a sense of how your internal writing process works as a story like this one's evolving as you've described, how long did you find yourself living with these characters before you had a conclusion you were happy with for them?
So interestingly, when I went just after I was stabbed and I had to do the writing exercise when I was 19, I changed myself to the fictional character of Duchess when I was 19. And that I'd been writing bits and pieces of her story since I was a teenager. So when I lost all the money in the stock market, I went back to Duchess's story and wrote a bit more. And I wrote about this girl that was struggling way more than I was. She had a really difficult time. If I was feeling down, she was like her mother was a depressive. If I was feeling angry, Duchess was burning with rage. And I projected a lot into this character. But again, I didn't, it felt, it's funny because it's about a 13-year-old girl in the US, but it felt too personal to go back and write it again. Her mother's a depressive, drinks too much, has taken drugs, really struggles to be a mother and a role model. And it's a difficult thing for Duchess. And then from there, I wanted to give her someone, someone that she looks after, and it's her younger brother, Robin. So I did a lot of research into children that are forced to grow up too quickly. I had quite a crappy childhood myself, and had a really difficult time when I was around that age, like 10 years old. And um, and so I wrote Duchess with Robin, her younger brother, and she's forced to be a carer. She's forced to grow up before she should, and she has this kind of responsibility on her shoulders that she shouldn't have. And her mother is friends with grew up with a guy named Walk, who is the chief of police in this town that doesn't really have any crime. And Walk is kind of her true north. She resists him because she doesn't like an authoritative figure, but she also knows that he's a good man. And so she's got these people around her, but no one that she can truly rely on. And she wants it to be a mother, but it isn't her mother, because her mother can barely look after herself. And then the story just kind of evolved from there. And I remember writing it over years.
To that end, before it took home the Golden Dagger for Best Crime Novel from the Crime Writers Association, and then the Best International Crime Fiction Novel from the Australian Crime Writers Association, among other accolades, as it skyrocketed your career overnight to bestseller status. What do you feel at the heart of the story drew so many readers in from around the world to love it as much as we all did?
I put it all down to the US really. So an editor called Amy Einhorn took a chance on me and the book. It just landed on her desk at the right time, I think, and she just started reading it and got behind it, and that just everything snowballed from there. And then Disney optioned it, and it sold around the world, and it was just to be part of something like that was really cool and really unexpected. It was odd, and it kind of happened during COVID, during lockdown, and so I never got to to feel it in the right way. Like I got to watch it happen through a screen. I missed the call to tell me that I was a New York Times bestseller because I was putting my daughter to bed. She'd just been born, and we bought an old house and took the roof off the day before lockdown. And then we couldn't get a new roof on it. So it was just raining into the house. And there was a baby coming, and it was just so incredibly stressful. And I wasn't really I just don't think I was prepared for it. For what would happen. And then the book started selling, and then it sold more and more and more, and then it just kept on. I think they call it a long tail, and it just keeps selling. And it's what everyone hopes for, but no one really knows why or how, or I think people spend a lot of money trying to work that out. I was still trading in the stock market, and I was working in a library as well, and I was writing. So I had kind of three jobs on the go and three kids. The newborn, it was, and then I was trading one morning, and my phone rang out of the blue, and it was a number I didn't recognize. So I answered the phone, and it was someone telling me that I was going to be arrested for stock market crime, stock market manipulation, and I was gearing up for publication and like really stressing, and I was writing the new book at the time, All the Colors of the Dark, and I was told this, so I got on the phone to like I had just hellish time. I was arrested for it, and then I interviewed under caution for like 6 hours or something. But it was this surreal thing because it was still COVID. So I had to go into my lawyer's office, and then we did it on video remote, and they kind of read me my rights on the video, like, and then we did this thing over Skype, this interview, and I didn't think I'd done anything wrong, but for the next, I think it took about 8 months, I was under investigation, and I thought, I've got a book coming out. I'm finally going to earn some money from it. It's either going to be a criminal investigation, in which case I'm really fucked, or it's civil, in which case I'm equally fucked because they're going to take all the money that I've made, if I finally made some money. And then I was really stressed, and I was trying to enjoy the process of publication. I was knee deep in this new book that I was writing, All the Colors of the Dark, which felt like this massive book, and I had this horrible thing hanging over me, and I didn't tell anyone about it, and
Did the
then
media get wind of it?
no,
Oh
no,
man, how lucky.
yeah, and then I was waiting to pick up my kids from school one day, and I got an email from the investigator, and he said, I need you to can I talk to you on the phone, and so I rushed back home and phoned him back, and there was someone else on the call, and I googled the guy's name, the other guy, and he was like this big scary investigator, and it was like I was reading about these £1 million fines and people going to jail, and they just said, we're dropping the case against you. And it was like, oh my, I was that just I remember saying on the phone, I said, oh my God, like I could just because I don't think I could cope anymore with it. And so after that, every everything good that happens, I'm always wary that I'm going to fuck it up in some way. It just feels like it's second nature, like I just have this personality type where I tend to get into trouble.
Did having children inspire you to want to write the YA novel Forevers? So they could read it a little earlier, say, than your adult novels?
I think We Begin at the End was so difficult and took so many years to finish. I needed to do something else before I went back into it again. I won't say it was a palate cleanser, but it's the only book that I've set not in the US, and it's a lot shorter, and it just felt like the right time to do something slightly different, but it's incredibly difficult. It's no easier writing YA than it is adult, that's for sure. And it can be a very unforgiving place, teenagers are reading it and giving you feedback. But it's a story of a group of teenagers that live in coastal England, and like 10 years before they spot an asteroid coming towards Earth, and they try and stop it constantly. NASA have been trying to stop it, and we're down to the last summer on Earth, and it looks at the question of what would you do if you could get away with anything? If there's no consequences for your actions, are people innately good? And and the teenagers of this town kind of get up to some really bad things, because they think there's going to be no tomorrow, at some point. But NASA is still claiming they're going to stop it. So you've kind of got half an eye on, if they do stop it, we're in real trouble because we've broken the law and gone a bit wild. But it was always something I was really interested in.
You've had some pretty heavy endorsements from the biggest names in the business rooting on your latest release, All the Colors of the Dark. From Gillian Flynn promising it hits like a sledgehammer, equal parts harrowing and triumphant, Whitaker's novel is a haunting story of America, alternating between its twin strands of violence and love, an absolutely must-read novel. While Kristen Hanna said bravo to a story that kept me frantically turning the pages and somehow made me cry at the end. Well, Alex McLady's added that this sprawling crime novel transcends its genre to become something epic in scope, haunting and ultimately deeply moving. Why did 1975 feel like the right year in America to set this story against? And please introduce us to its unforgettable star, Patch.
All the Colors of the Dark, it was going to need to follow We Begin at the End, and which was something I found intimidating. First of all, because it was the first book that had sold loads, and all of a sudden I was paid a lot more money, and the stakes felt higher, and there were people waiting for it, and I had a new team in the US agent, UK agent. There's a US editor, UK. There's a lot more people involved, and but I also I knew early on as I started writing it that it was going to be a really big book. It was going to so if we follow Duchess for a year in kind of great detail, what happens if we follow characters from that age over a lifetime? Like what could be done in the story. And I knew I wanted to do it, but I did kind of wonder if I could do it. I worried that it would be beyond my skill set as an author. Can I tell a story this big? Can I take it from 1975 to the early noughties, which is where I wanted it to end? And I knew roughly, because that's roughly when We Begin at the End is set, and or a decade before that. And I wondered, if I could do this and if I could do it, how much history is involved? Because I don't know an awful lot about the US, and I don't know an awful lot about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s in the US. It's a huge amount of work, but I also didn't want to get bogged down in the detail. I didn't want to. Sometimes when you read a book set in the 80s, they kind of ram cultural references down your throat to remind you it's the 80s, and I wanted it to be slightly more subtle than that, which was a headache. But I was working in the library at the time, and I used their resources. Um, and so I had maps and travel guides and fiction and non-fiction, and I just had like a mess of everything. But at the heart of it, I had these two characters, Patch and Saint, and they're 13, and I knew that if I got them right, everything else would fall into place. And so I didn't give too much thought to writing the serial killer in the book, because to me he was the least interesting character in it. He was the one that would there's a crime at the heart of the story, and it's kind of the backbone of the story, but it's not a crime story, if that makes sense. you
Yeah,
know
so Patch, tell us about Patch and that spirit then, of who you were really making the star of the story.
Yeah, so Patch is a 13-year-old boy, wears an eye patch, was born with one eye, and I had a really simple pitch for the book. It was two abducted teenagers fall in love in the pitch black basement they're being held in, having never seen each other. The boy escapes and can't find his way back to the girl. The police don't believe that she's real. They think that he made her up because of the trauma, been held in the dark for so long. But he knows, like he feels it in his heart that she's real. And so what follows is this obsession, this. I think it's 27 years, and it's a hunt for this girl. He knows her name. She spoke to him in the dark. He doesn't know anything else about her. How's he going to find her? And his best friend Saint is the person that keeps looking for him when he's abducted at the beginning of the book. And she joins him on this search. She sacrifices a lot, and she's a brilliant student and can go off to the Ivy Leagues, and she sacrifices everything to bring him inner peace, to help him find this girl. She kind of is focused on finding the serial killer, finding the person that took him instead. And their lives, it's their sliding doors moment. I was always fascinated in it. Everyone can look back at points in their life, where their lives have met a crossroads. Like if I don't do this thing, if I hadn't walked down that street in London, I wouldn't have been stabbed. My life might have been different. If I'd done better at school, my brother did well at school. We kind of led very different lives, and I was really interested in that. What if Patch and Saint's sliding doors moment is this terrible thing that happens when they're 13, but what if some good comes out of it? What if it leads to something brilliant? Because I think had I not been stabbed, I wouldn't be talking to you now about a book that is about to be published. I'm certain I wouldn't have done that with my life. So, but again, is it worth it? Certainly for Patch and Saint, the stakes are very high. It's hard to say something is worth it when it's caused you so much pain.
With regard to how much you feel what the characters do when you're writing, I mean, there's all kinds of ways authors can reference emotions in their own past that characters can have to feel, etc. How does that process work for you in that respect?
Um, with difficulty actually, because I mentioned before that I had a difficult childhood, and like when I was 10, I had my arm was broken by an adult. My parents split up, and new people come into your lives, and one of them broke my arm, and it was really rough, and I had a really rough time afterwards. And and I see that as kind of the very first crossroads that I came to, or very first pivotal moment in my life, because I think after that point I had problem sleeping, and I had a bit of a kind of, I didn't want to feel like a victim, and I think so when the guy pulled out a knife, instead of running away, I chose to not feel like a victim and fought back, which led to me getting stabbed. And it was kind of this path laid out for me from when I was 10 years old. And you could trace it back even further to when my parents got divorced. Because if they hadn't got divorced, this person wouldn't have come into my life, And you can kind of drive yourself a bit mad, but there's also something really fascinating about it. And so when I was writing Patch, I kind of felt a bit of what he was going through, and laid it out there. But also remember that I'm writing someone, entirely new, and his experience is going to be different. And it was just tough, really. I got to the end of the book, and it was the first time I've been like, we're gearing up to publish soon, and it was the first time I've been properly nervous about publication, and it was the feeling that I can't do any better. Like as a writer, where I'm at now, All the Colors of the Dark is the absolute best that I can do. And if people don't like it, I've got nothing else. Like, I'm certain that won't be the case in another 3 or 4 years when I write the next book. I'll feel like that's the best. But this one, it just felt like me and everyone that worked on it just kind of gave it everything.
Now, you have what's safe to say is a fascinating way of constructing your novels. We'd love for you to illustrate a bit for viewers if you would.
So I work across 3 screens, which means that I can't ever write on a laptop or anything like that. And in the middle screen, I have the manuscript, like the Word document. And then around it, I will have images. I might have music playing. I will have, facts about the time or things like that, a photograph of the time. And it's very like, once all that's in place, then I'll sit down and write whichever scene I feel like writing. So I write out of order for maybe the first year or so, and then begin to sew it back together in year two, and turn it into something like a book in year three. And it takes a long time, and there's no easier way to do it for me at the moment. But with dialogue, I yeah, just go on feeling. Like sometimes I'll write it all and then read it back aloud, and it takes a long time, doesn't it, to learn a character when you're writing. It's a funny one because I'll start writing them, and then a year later, all the stuff that I wrote in month 1 and 2 is completely like, it reads like a different person. So I go back, wipe it, start again, and keep going until I really know their voices and know how they'll react in any given situation, how the pattern of their speech changes when they're angry or depressed or anything like that. It'll be really real subtleties. Yeah, it's kind of, it gets a bit obsessive, I think. It's what I'm trying to say.
Your writer's story has most definitely had its unique twists and turns, but it's crossed some of the same paths other authors talk about in the course of charting their careers. For the younger version of yourself, just starting theirs, what wisdom would you pass on before we run?
One of the few things that have really stuck with me, because I have a terrible memory for these sort of things, and I never feel qualified to give advice, is to kind of be fearless, to be bold and be fearless, and take the risks that you think that you shouldn't take, or that you think you're not skilled enough to take. Like I have no business writing the books that I write, set in places I've never visited, from, getting into the mind of a 13-year-old, and it just feels like something I shouldn't be able to do, or I shouldn't even take the chance on doing. And had I not, I definitely wouldn't have achieved anything. I don't think I wouldn't have written the sort of books that I wanted to read. And also, I would tell my even myself from maybe 6 months ago to try and enjoy it. Because, when the goalposts get bigger, when, the expectation gets bigger, you lose sight of why you do it in the first place. And it's really crucial not to, because I think you do your best work when you're having the most fun, when you're really enjoying it.
Chris, it has been fascinating talking today. Thank you so much for taking our time to be on About the Authors TV.
Yeah, cool.